Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 3 of our critical thinking course. I wanted to make a video to go over the discussion for the week, as well as the nonverbal language assignment, which is our first major writing assignment that is due on Sunday. So let's go ahead and get started. Let me share the screen, take a look at this week's announcement. So last week we learned about becoming a critical thinker and had a discussion on the influence of authority on our critical thinking skills. This week we're going to take a look at critical thinking and language. How and why do words have the meanings that they have? What power do our words hold? Is language arbitrary, which we'll talk about in a minute? Should we be offended by words, etc.? Those are some of the ideas that we are going to kind of be thinking about moving throughout this lesson. Our work for the week includes the language discussion. The language discussion started on Wednesday the 16th. It runs through Sunday the 20th. Your first posts need to be in by the end of the day today, Friday the 18th. That's how all the discussions will be, your first post by Friday. And like all discussions, you need to get a few replies into your classmates in order to earn full credit. This discussion is an interesting one. It asks you to read a New York Times article about a man who was in a pretty prolific political position and used a word that he probably shouldn't have used. And he used the word correctly according to its denotative dictionary definition, but it's a word that sounds very much like a racial slur and was very clearly going to be misunderstood, and yet he used the word anyway, and was misunderstood. And then a lot of repercussions, the whole situation kind of exploded in a bit of a crazy way. So we're going to be kind of investigating that. We also have the nonverbal language assignment due Sunday night. This assignment asks you to consider a particular legal case from recent memory in which the accused certainly appeared guilty, but direct evidence was difficult to come by. It then asks you to respond to the question, should jurors be allowed to see the defendant during a trial, or should the jury be placed out of sight of the defendant in order to only respond to the verbal information presented in the case? So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to break down some of the ideas for the discussion real quick, and then we're going to go over the rubric and the assignment prompt for the nonverbal language assignment so that we're all on the same page and know what's going on. So to start off with, let's talk about the discussion a little bit. Critical thinking and language. So essentially we all use language, but language means more than just our spoken words. It can also be words that are not spoken. It can be our mannerisms, our tones, our inflections, our facial expressions, our twitches, our eye contact or lack thereof, our posture, our clothing, our hygiene, all of those things. I often, when I talk about this sort of thing with high school students, they often tell me, I don't have control over all those things, or it's not fair that I'm judged by all those things. And I kind of agree. It's not fair that we judge people by their clothing and their appearance and all of that. And yet we do it. Consciously, unconsciously, subconsciously, what have you, we still do it, right? So it is an aspect of communication. And it is important to understand some of the complexities of language in order to understand this discussion and to really think critically about what is going on when we speak or when we verbalize or even communicate with nonverbal language. So let's talk about what language is. It's kind of weird to think about, but language is actually a system of symbols that we have attached meaning to. And the way it works is that you have signifiers and then you have the signified. So the signifier, bicycle, is a combination of letters or a combination of sounds we make with our mouth, which is weird, that signifies a two-wheeled vehicle that you pedal and ride around on. The signifier car signifies a vehicle, right? That you drive. And then signifier tree signifies a tree. Okay, so we have to investigate a little bit more closely what words actually are, because the word tree, for example, is just a series of letters that have been put in a certain order and make a certain sound, tree, when we say them, but nothing about the word tree makes the meaning of the word tree mean tree. That's kind of confusing. What I mean by that is that we, meaning people, society, culture, history, throughout time, decided that the word tree, this sound I make with my voice, or this combination of letters in this arrangement, means tree. And we've passed that decision, that linguistic decision, on through generations, and that's kind of how languages are developed. Again, if you're a linguistic theory person, I'm very much aware I'm super oversimplifying a complex process, but for our purposes, that's about as deep with linguistic theory as we need to go. But it leads to this idea that language then is kind of arbitrary. And what I mean is that if words only mean something because we give them that meaning, and words can mean multiple things, and words can change and lose their meanings over time, and words can mean different things to different social or cultural groups, then the meaning of a word can be dependent upon the receiver, the person hearing the word or reading the word, just as much as it is on the person saying it. So for example, when I say the word or the signifier tree, what signified tree comes to your mind? It probably depends on where you grew up. Your mind probably has a dominant image for tree. So for example, if you grew up in the Midwest, then you might think tree and think color leaves changing. You might think tree and think pine tree, Christmas. But if you grew up someplace else and I say tree, you might think something like this, right? Entirely dependent, or you might think palm tree or whatever. So the idea, you can sort of start to see how language gets a little confusing, because how can one word mean all these different types of trees that look very different, right? Even go back to my example about a car. When I say car, I don't necessarily mean a four-door sedan, right? Cars used the same for SUV, for hatchback, whatever, right? Okay, so what does all this mean? It means that language is arbitrary, that it is fluid, it is not precise, and it is not exact. And because of those things, there is lots of room for issue, for error, for confusion. And what is said, what is heard, and what is meant can then often be quite different. So essentially, language isn't real. The signified are in our heads. When I say tree, it's up to you as a listener to understand what I am signifying and what is signified, right? Okay. If you're interested, Plato and the ancient Greeks were very much interested in this sort of what is real, how do we describe what is real sort of thing. But for our purposes, we need to think about how we are actually understood then. And some philosophers argue that we never really do understand one another, that no matter how much you love someone, how much you talk with someone, no matter how much they try to explain their experience to you, language is insufficient to ever fully understand what's going on with another person, which is kind of crazy and a little sad to think about. So I want to talk a little bit about our discussion as it relates to this. So what we have with our discussion is a guy named David Howard who said the following sentence. He said, "I will have to be niggardly with this fund because it's not going to be a lot of money." Please note the word niggardly, as it is described defined in the dictionary, is an adjective meaning reluctant to give or spend, stingy, meanly or ungenerously small or scantily. If you thought that I just said a racial slur, I don't blame you. It's because this word certainly looks and sounds like a very bad racial slur. It actually, linguistically, in terms of like etymology and the way language develops, it has nothing to do with that word. And yet it so very much sounds like it and seems like it. So in a political meeting about like a budget meeting, David Howard said this word, meaning stingy, and he used it correctly. If we replace the word stingy with niggardly here, I will have to be stingy with this fund. It's dictionary-wise the correct word. Hopefully you can see where the problem lies here, right? And where the potential confusion and the coming controversy erupts, right? Okay. So, of course, we have words do not just exist on their own in a vacuum, they exist culturally. And ours is a culture of history of slavery and racism that is as prevalent and front page today as ever, right? And so he says this word that gets misunderstood. And and the message received, even though he's talking about a budget, is a politician said what? So you can kind of see where this is going. So our discussion is going to be about his use of the word and the use of critical thinking or lack thereof in using that word. Also, potentially in the receivers who reacted to it. We can think about that as well. Did he do anything wrong by saying a word that sounds terrible, but technically by dictionary definition isn't? And that's kind of what that discussion will be about. So now let's go and look at the nonverbal language assignment real quick. If I can download the prompt. Okay. Let me share the screen, take a look at the prompt with you guys. Maybe. Okay, here we go. In 2004, Scott Peterson was convicted of killing his wife, Lacey, and their, why did that close? Let's try again. In 2004, Scott Peterson was convicted of killing his wife, Lacey, and their unborn son, Connor. There was no conclusive proof he committed the crime, only circumstantial evidence. Jurors said a major factor in their decision was Peterson's nonverbal communication, his lack of emotional responsiveness, and, quote, stony demeanor, even during wrenching testimony about his dead wife and son, end quote. The question that you need to answer is, should jurors be allowed to see a defendant during a trial, or should a law be put in place that sets the defendant out of the juror's view so as not to influence their decision? So this is the main question, right? Should jurors be allowed to see a defendant during trial, or should we put them out of view so that their appearance and their nonverbal language does not influence a jury's decision? There are several sub-questions, and each of them needs to be given substantial time and devotion and dedication and consideration as you write your paper. The sub-questions are, what language games are played in the courtroom, both verbal and nonverbal? What manipulative elements, verbal and nonverbal, may be involved in the courtroom? What are the goals of the defense versus the prosecution, and how may each use language accordingly? And then the use of different rhetorical tools, such as euphemisms, diffemisms, sarcasm, etc. So you need to analyze each of these, break them down, and address them in your response. If we look at the actual scoring rubric, 15 points is for content, meaning your opinion, and not just your opinion on this, but your evidence that you give to support your opinion. 5 is for grammar, sentence, and paragraph structure, and then 5 is for writing level. One thing I highly recommend avoiding, and one of the pitfalls that students have had with this assignment in the past, is the Scott Peterson case is just context. Please don't write a summary of the Scott Peterson case. Please don't make this focused on the Scott Peterson case. It's not really the question. The question is, should jurors be allowed to see a defendant during a trial, or should a law be put in place that sets them out of the jury's point of view? Essentially what we are getting at is things like nonverbal language, is appearance, demeanor, etc. in a courtroom, does that have a play in how we come to a verdict? The Scott Peterson thing, like I said, was set up as a context because the evidence was really circumstantial. And it kind of seems from some of the jurors' own admissions that they found Scott Peterson guilty of murder because Scott Peterson seemed guilty of murder, acted guilty of murder. Not that the evidence or facts proved he was. That's a scary thought because seeming something versus being it are very different, right? Or maybe they're not. I don't know. Those are kind of the things that you have to figure out with this assignment. So again, please don't focus entirely on the Scott Peterson thing. It's just there as context. The main question is, should jurors be allowed to see a defendant? And these are all the sub-questions that also need to be addressed in your writing. Again, this is due Sunday night. The discussion runs from Wednesday through Sunday, and your first post need to be in by tonight, as well as a few replies to your classmates throughout the discussion. If you have questions on the assignment or the discussion, please let me know, and I would be happy to help you out. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a great weekend. See you.